Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for yet another quickie segment where I talk about a bunch of tracks, a bunch of albums that I missed in full-length reviews but wanted to talk about kind of quickly in a very cursory manner. This segment, it actually took me a little while to do it, so a lot of these albums are a little old, but I still wanted to talk about them. So, let's just kind of go. 1. The Postal Service have a new track out, teasing toward the deluxe edition release of their fantastic indie electronic indie pop album Give Up. The song is titled A Tattered Line of String, and I don't like it at all. It's too fast-paced, the melody seems really kind of cursory and not that catchy or sweet or inspiring, which is usually the case with Postal Service melodies. It just seems like this piece of music that they had been holding on for quite a while, and like I just said, didn't make the cut. I am happy that a lot of people, because of all the hype, are hearing this fantastic album that they would not have run across otherwise, and that there are some live shows coming up, but, really, I'm just gonna cross my fingers. Even though I don't think it's going to happen, I'm just going to cross my fingers for some actual new material that sounds new, not just a rehash of the old stuff or anything like that. I would love to see the Postal Service Phase 2, even if it's been, a pretty long time since we last heard from them, full-length album style. The OC's come out with a new track called Minotaur. I'm actually loving what this band has been doing recently on their stuff. They're not quite so, I guess, sort of brittle and distorted and lo-fi as they used to be, especially with their last LP and this new track, which has all these string sections on this song, mixed together with their typical garage rock and psych rock sound with some pretty zany, kooky vocals. It's a nice mix and a nice tune. Next, Kurt Vile drops a 9-minute track with Walkin' on a Pretty Day, a fantastic teaser to his next LP, and actually more enjoyable than you would imagine Kurt Vile to be for 9 minutes. He made this song that feels kind of Neil Young inspired, a fantastic and very blissful experience for the entirety of its length. Has a new single out called SLYD, fantastic dance track, sharp energy, sharp momentum, and next, The Strokes have a new single out, teasing toward their new full-length LP. The single is called All the Time, and man, was I disappointed with this song. This song is completely soulless. I actually thought the last track that they dropped from this new LP was pretty fun. The guitars feel so lifeless and detailless, and Julian's vocals seem much less passionate than usual. I'm hoping that not every track on this new LP is as flat as this one, or else we're going to be in for a bumpy ride. Next, rapper Antwon has a new mixtape out called Dark Denim. It's a pretty spacey cloud rap-esque mixtape, but the thing is, unlike most rappers that kind of go down that style, who maybe have kind of a blunted flow or kind of a swaggy flow, Antwon has quite the beefy voice, a lot of presence, a lot of heaviness to his voice, which definitely separates him from most people going for this more experimental instrumental style. Brian Chippendale, under the name Black Puss, one half of Lightning Bolt, has a new track out called 1000 Years, really heavy, really noisy, really distorted. This dude's next full-length LP should be a really ear-piercing experience. And Bonobo has a new track out featuring none other than Erykah Badu on vocals, and his very nuanced electronic music beat production style melds together well with her very soulful vocals. Giles Corey has a new EP out if you're into his full-length debut. This guy, aka Dan Barrett, Connecticut musician whose music I enjoy quite a bit. Now, this new EP of his is filled with those acoustic, singer-songwriter, slowcore songs with a lot of sound manipulation and noise. It's dark, it's dismal, it's depressing. Give it a listen. And now we move on to albums. Baptist's Bushcraft, if you give this LP a listen, you're basically getting some sludgy hardcore punk, much of which has been coming out on Southern Lord Records recently. Of course, this record is out on that label as well. If you're familiar with bands like Black Breath, for example, or Nails, you can pretty much already figure out what this album sounds like. And unfortunately for me, that was the biggest disappointment. Like, considering what I know about this style of punk already, I just feel like Baptists don't bring any personality or really any surprises to the table. They have that heavy sound, they have the momentum, they have the performance, they just don't stand out in the albums that really Southern Lord has kind of been saturating the internet with. Matmos, the Marriage of True Minds. Matmos is an experimental electronic music duo, have been doing this for a long time, have quite a few albums under their belts, actually have come out with one of my favorite albums of all time, the LP Supreme Balloon, which they dropped in 2008, one of my favorite synthesizer-led albums. Extremely colorful, extremely creative, textured, and a real departure from what they typically do, which is sample the oddest sounds that you will hear in music. Everything from weird noises and rocks and ice and sperm, I've also heard, as well as rhinoplasty, and the fact that they had a hand in producing my favorite Bjork album, Vespertine, also had me very psyched for this new LP of theirs. However, I was disappointed in this LP in just how disjointed it was, how underwhelming it was, and just how eccentric it wasn't in comparison to some of their other LPs. For example, the opener, which put me to sleep right away, just feels like this very bland, unimaginative piece of new jazz. It just doesn't have that out there flair that I typically look for from a Matmos song. I could see that maybe they wanted to go a little more pretty, a little more serene than they typically do on this track, but it just didn't strike me as beautiful as maybe they wanted it to be. Actually, all of this heavy instrumentation combined with the vocal samples, the vocal narrations that are used on many tracks throughout this album, it made me think of something that maybe the Books would have done if they decided to make another full length. However, I do love the track that comes in right after Very Large Green Triangles, but after this track, the duo starts throwing out all of these very underdeveloped motifs that don't really seem to go anywhere or do much of anything than present an idea, a really good idea, but then they just sort of cut out and move on to the next thing. The album for me actually didn't get interesting again until the final few tracks, the last of which, the closer, actually kind of seems like Matmos trying to tribute the genre of black metal. It doesn't seem ironic or jokey or anything like that. It's a truly badass moment in the track, and what they eventually shift it into, because it's not black metal for the whole thing, what they shift it into with all these synthesizers, it gets more heavenly, it gets prettier, is pretty amazing. If every track on this LP had the vision and the creativity and that sort of what the hell factor of the last song, I just would have had my mind blown by this LP. Biffy Clyro is a UK rock band who used to have a huge post-hardcore influence in their music, but these days, with their most recent LPs, they've pretty much settled for some very average alternative rock and alternative pop. But what truly just sinks down into the pit of my stomach on this LP are the achy breaky lyrics that bring this extremely contrived sense of sadness. Really, for me, the lyrics on this LP should have stayed in the tear-stained diary that they were written in. When these lyrics aren't making me cringe with lines like "you and me and a little cup of cyanide," they're spelling out the very bad metaphors that they're singing as if the listener can't figure it out for him or herself. A few songs on this LP do rock and come off with a lot of energy, like "A Girl and His Cat," but unfortunately much of the songs on this album just rubbed me the wrong way from the beginning of this CD to the end of it. And then, after I listened to it, I actually learned that this thing is in fact a double album, and there was another CD of it I needed to listen to in order to do a full review. But honestly, after one CD, I really did have enough. The new Frightened Rabbit LP, Pedestrian Verse. In a nutshell, this album is basically a snooty downtown bar that's very close to an Ivy League college campus. The beer is overpriced, there's all these old-timey pictures that are ironically placed onto the wall of like dudes with really big mustaches. It just feels like a bland mixture of indie rock with folk, kind of like Mumford & Sons in a way, but way less layered, passionate, and convincing. I feel like some people may not necessarily like that comparison because of how big Mumford & Sons are and just how, I guess, their music has this sense of epicness to it, but I have to give it to Mumford because they have a sense of ambition that Frightened Rabbit truly, truly lacks on this very so-so plain Jane album. Black metal band, a post-metal band, a post-rock influenced rock band whose songs are pretty much instrumental. If you're into artists like Wolves in the Throne Room, if you're into Death Heaven, if you're into Krallice, there are definitely elements of this album that you will like. The drumming is pretty tight, the guitar chords are nice as well, they truly fit the blueprint of what you would expect from this stuff, and the production is stellar as well. Good, vast, heavy, atmospheric recording. The issue for me is that, I mean, for being an instrumental band, they don't really bring much detail to the table. It, in a way, kind of feels like they need a vocalist because they're writing these songs in such a way where it feels like they're making room for a vocalist. For sure, these guys know a great atmospheric black metal sound they could play. They're just not writing these songs ambitiously enough to really kind of make them stand out as an American black metal act, as an instrumental metal act either. Mr. Lies, Mowgli, this guy's an electronic music producer whose influences range from electronic music to instrumental hip-hop, a little bit of R&B too, and this new LP of his feels like kind of a short collection of tracks that he feels are maybe the best he's produced up until this point. And there are some good cuts on here. The dude has production chops when it comes to writing a track, getting a good groove going. I just feel like he needs to get his sound craft up there in order to make himself stand out, give himself a style, and I feel like he's really close to doing that. Next, Joe Budden, No Love Lost. I mean, really that title of this album sums up my feelings for this album because I'm not sure what I really expected from this LP after listening to the last Slaughterhouse LP. And Joe Budden pretty much does the same thing with this new LP. He comes out with a cookie cutter pop rap album that anybody could have made. He raps on the same kind of beats that everybody else is rapping on, with the same kind of auto-tuned hooks, R&B hooks, trap-flavored instrumentals. It's not entertaining, it's not interesting, it's not original. He's just riding a wave that everybody else is trying to ride, but everybody else is on the peak and the higher point of the wave. He's really kind of in the middle or on the bottom. Right now he's just riding this sound that to me makes him sound boring and just like another face in mainstream hip-hop, and that's it. The new Brotha Lynch hung LP, Mannibalector. This dude is a California horrorcore MC with a few classics in the genre under his belt. A lot of his older stuff has that classic West Coast hip-hop sound, but is way more eerie and bloody and horrific when it comes to lyrical content. And as a producer and a lyricist, this dude has developed his style for years, because certainly today he doesn't sound like that stuff anymore. Today, his instrumental style is very, very horror soundtrack based, with lots of horns and string samples in there, just booming and hitting, kind of adding those it just sounds like he's grabbing instrumental parts from those kind of shocking moments when something pops out at you in a slasher flick. And as far as his rapping goes, he's drifted away from that typical rapping on the tempo, 16 bar, straightforward kind of style. These days, he's rapping in a way where it feels like he's almost ranting or kind of narrating. For sure, he has a style. It's going to appeal to some people, but unfortunately, not me, honestly, because I feel like his most recent stuff is very grotesque. It's very bloody, has a lot of cannibalism, stuff like that in it, a lot of murder, a lot of perverse details. But the thing is, when it comes to plot, character development, anything like that, this new album and most of his recent stuff is kind of the equivalent to like a Saw film or something like that. There's a lot of brutality, but not a lot of tension, especially on an album this long with 20 or so tracks. It just gets kind of old after a while because there's not really an arc. He's just constantly hitting you again and again and again with all of this bloodshed. The new Esben and the Witch LP, this is basically an indie rock, indie pop, dream pop record. Female fronted, it's their sophomore LP. For sure it has better production than their debut album, but the thing is the gritty, more lo-fi sounds on that debut gave them a sort of dark kind of mystery to their music, which this album severely lacks. And because this album lacks that and has this very pristine sound, it's a very pretty sound, the group kind of reveals themselves to maybe not really have been that mysterious or that dark in the first place. In fact, the emotions, the melodies, and the songs on this entire album are kind of mild. The new Ink LP, No World, this is basically one more alternative atmospheric R&B project that you can throw on top of the heap of atmospheric alternative R&B projects. Because No World is not particularly good or novel for this more nuanced take on R&B music, because the vocals, the singing is especially weak. There's actually a consciousness of how bad the vocals are on this record from Ink, because the vocals really kind of hang in this quiet, very average pitch range and rarely ever try to climb out of it, because the abilities, the singing abilities, just aren't there. And because the singing abilities aren't there, the passion isn't there. And that also comes out in the instrumentals, which are also very airy and light and bland and don't really have a lot of punch or a lot of color to them either. And the new Darwin D's record, Songs for Imaginative People, which is a pretty decent indie pop and indie rock LP. Darwin is pretty much sticking with the sound that helped get him to where he is today through fantastic singles like DNA and Radar Detector. Darwin definitely has a knack for writing some catchy hooks and has a lot of eccentric qualities coming out through his lyrics and especially his music videos. I just feel like that eccentricity doesn't really spell itself out in a lot of the melodies that he plays or just the songs that he writes either, because it just to me feels like very straightforward indie rock, indie pop music, which is gonna feel great for some people, but I'm looking for something maybe just slightly more out there in terms of songwriting. Still, when it comes to this style, I do think Darwin has personality, and I can't take that away from him. Even if for an entire LP, his stuff does get a little old for me because it's not like he writes that many dynamics into his full lengths. And that's pretty much it for all the releases that I wanted to talk about in this video. Thank you for watching. You're the best. Oh yeah, forever.